All right, everybody, welcome back live at Drew's house, another edition. Hope everybody is doing well. We are back here out of the studio and back in my kitchen. That is because I myself am actually coming off a little battle with COVID. Not horrible, but not great, I will say. I don't wish that upon anybody, and I don't know what it would have been like without the vaccine, but it was not a great couple days. Definitely, I don't get sick too often, so whenever I have like a fever and chills, I'm like, whoa, that's not good. But anyway, I'm here. We're deciding to do one more show here before we go back into the studio for a little bit. And hey, I like doing shows from my kitchen. So with that, good theme of the show today, we bring in Alex Goldstein, who first time on the show. How are you, Alex?
Doing great. Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
All right. So you, for those of you who don't know, he is the creator of Faces of COVID. Anybody who's on, I see it mostly on Twitter. I'm sure Alex can tell you where else he puts it, but it is a very powerful, moving thing. And you know what? Enough about me. Alex, why don't you tell us what exactly this is for people who don't know, and how you came up with it?
Sure. So Faces of COVID is only on Twitter right now. I had experimented with some other platforms, and it really just ultimately both my own mental and physical bandwidth decided to leave it there and not go too far on any other platforms. But, you know, I think like a lot of folks at the start of the pandemic back in March of 2020, we were being sort of overwhelmed with this very data heavy story while also being sort of petrified about what was to come. And we were hearing about cases and hospitalizations and deaths. And while the statistics told a really important story, they also, I felt right away, kind of left out the human element behind those numbers. And especially as things got really dark and a lot of us were starting to feel really isolated at home. I personally was looking for some kind of cathartic way to process what was happening. And so for me, it really began as a process of wanting personally to know who we were losing. You know, we were hearing these numbers day after day, 50 people died today, 75 people died today, 100 people died today. And knowing that behind each one of those was a person who lived their life with family and friends and coworkers. And so it began as an effort to really explore that. It very quickly became clear that I was not the only person looking for that. And, you know, pretty dramatically over the course of a couple months, picked up a pretty large following, and now it's around 150,000 people who follow it on a regular basis. And I really, the purpose of it sort of evolved as the pandemic has evolved, but I think there's really a couple primary purposes right now that motivate me to keep doing it. Number one is just this basic idea that people are more than statistics, and that we have an obligation and a responsibility to give life and animate those numbers to the people who they were, and to do that for their families, because, you know, a lot of the traditional means that people have for grieving are not available right now. We are not able to do all of the communal mourning that we might traditionally do. I actually went through this myself. My father passed away over the summer from prostate cancer, and that was right as the Delta wave was beginning. And we had to scuttle all of our plans for a big funeral, the one that he unquestionably deserved and would have been very joyful to know had happened. You know, we couldn't do any of it. And it was very isolating. And I think for a lot of people in this pandemic, just having some opportunity to say, this is who my loved one was, this is why they mattered, and having, frankly, strangers be able to react to that and see that actually is meaningful, because we don't have a lot of other options. And then I think the second motivation that has really been pushing me throughout this pandemic is that there are so many policy failures throughout this experience, from the local, state, federal level, and also among us as individuals, about what we failed to do as a part of a society. And I actually think that sharing the names and the faces make it harder for people to look away, and forces us to be accountable to some extent to those failures.
It's, you know, I woke up this morning, and this is not a lie. This is the very first tweet that I saw this morning, and it was from last night, but it happens to be first on my timeline. And it was somebody who was tempted to make sharp replies about something. He says, instead, I retweeted the Faces of COVID account that has meant so much to me throughout this whole ordeal. reminding me that anger never matters as much as somebody else's loss. I mean, I know you probably get a million of those now, and probably some that mean a lot to you, but I can imagine that's very rewarding, waking up for you and seeing somebody react to your little creation that way.
Well, if I look around, it's not just COVID, it's sort of everything that's happening around us in the political sphere, in the way that trust has kind of eroded across so many different parts of our lives, that I think empathy is like completely drained out of our day-to-day lives, and injecting some empathy back into it, I think can actually go a really long way for people, because you realize that you've been missing it and that you've been kind of consuming these empty calories of really polarized, vitriolic, like always in kind of battle mode, and to just be able to take a moment and, you know, create a little space for grief and loss, because this has been a traumatic 2 years. I think, yeah, it is meaningful. Honestly, though, I think what I find most powerful is, I don't know, maybe 6 or 7 months into the project, I was starting to get a lot of messages from people requesting for me to share their loved one's story on the platform. And I was realizing that I needed some way to really operationalize that, because it was getting very difficult for me to keep track of. And so I created a submission form, which has now received about 1,500 submissions from people all across the country and some people from abroad. And, the opportunity to actually do it proactively for a family that wants to see their loved one memorialized this way is really powerful. And very often the feedback that I get from them is that it actually, sometimes they feel like it's almost trite to say that, like, oh, that was so meaningful to see my loved one on Twitter, like, because Twitter has this reputation of being this like toxic sludge factory. But in that moment, when you are isolated, when you have had to forego some of your traditional means of grieving with community, it actually is meaningful for some stranger you've never met to reply and say, I'm sorry for your loss, because they're not, it's a reminder that you're not going crazy and you're not by yourself in your house while the rest of the world moves on, that people are paying attention. And I think especially in this environment, it is easy, if you've lost someone in the last 2 years, to feel like, how the hell is the whole world moving on and not grieving? Like, how are we not stopping and, processing this? And I think that there's consequences to not processing it. And so I've been most gratified to see the way the family members who submit stories respond about the kind of feedback they got once it was posted, the replies they got, the messages they received, and things like that. So.
And a lot of these, correct me if I'm wrong, but a lot of these were you made the post and then some family member, maybe that didn't even know you were doing it, noticed it, and were just completely moved that, wow, somebody took the time to remember my dad, remember my grandfather, whatever. I mean, I've seen some of those messages posted your way just in public. I'm sure you get more in private. What are those like?
Yeah, so there was one early on that, like, really I don't know, kind of punched me in the gut. A woman reached out to me and said that she had been having, she had lost her father to COVID. I think she lived in Minnesota. She felt like totally alone. She was feeling extremely severely depressed, and it was late at night. She couldn't sleep. It was like 3 a.m. And so she just was doing what any grieving person would do in that situation, which is she went to Google and just plugged her dad's name into the search bar. And the first thing that comes up is that I had happened to have shared this story on Faces of COVID. And so she sees this story with a pull quote from the obituary, and then probably hundreds of replies of people saying how sorry they are that this person is no longer with us. And that in that moment, it was like just enough light in the darkness to make her feel like she might be able to find her way through this. And it's one of those things, like many things I've experienced since starting Faces of COVID, that I never really had anticipated when I started it, that it would sort of snowball into something like that. But once I realized that it was having that impact for people, it made the motivation to continue doing it much more obvious, for me, because I get a lot of questions. I'm approaching 2 years of doing this every single day. I took 2 weeks off when my father passed away, and otherwise I've been doing it every single day. And people, the most common question I get is, how much longer are you going to keep doing this? And my reaction is, so long as it's meaningful and there's more stories to share and people, who have lost someone find value, then I'm going to keep going, because I'm still doing a service that, means something to people.
Alex Goldstein joining us, the creator of Faces of COVID. When did you know? It's a unique thing when something goes viral, which this is really what this is. Something just takes off like this. When did you know that, okay, yeah, I definitely, that's something?
Yeah, it's sort of an interesting case study in social media dynamics, because the first 2 months or so, there was a couple hundred followers, right? Like it was still my catharsis and project to process myself. It wasn't necessarily for everybody else. And if other people plugged in, great, we're probably 200, 300 followers. And then I don't know exactly how it happened, but the moment that things really changed, this is going to sound so random, but when Dan Rather discovered it, and so Dan Rather saw it, he tweeted, so Dan Rather has like 4 million followers or something, and he retweeted a few of the posts, which immediately started creating a lot of activity. And then he actually tweeted, hey, everybody, there's this really powerful account. You should go check it out. And I think I got 10,000 followers in like 2 hours. So it's a reminder that there are certain voices on social media that have the power to really shift attention and to grow and create virality for things like this. And then, from that point on, as soon as he did that, a lot of other people with fairly big followings started to make it a regular part of their diet on social media and started sharing it regularly, like Chris Hayes and from MSNBC, and Ayanna Pressley, who I also happen to be an advisor for, former advisor for. And so as those types of folks discovered it, it kind of gave it its energy of its own. But I will say that it's mostly right now sustained by regular people with a couple hundred followers who feel compelled each day to keep sharing this out.
The power of Dan Rather, my goodness.
Yeah, the man. If, by the way, when somebody with that level of sort of renown discovers social media even late in life, it's something to behold. And he is a prolific tweeter. I give him a lot of credit. I assume he does it on his own, or I don't know if he has anyone helping him, but kudos to Dan.
His days of the newsman. I'm just going to play the middle road on this. He's kind of he's earned that right to
have a point of view now. Exactly. Dan Rather, Twitter columnist. Yes. I think you could say.
Yeah, he has his opinions. This is these days. So this whole thing has been great on so many levels. But I think one thing that hooked me onto you a couple of weeks ago was I did notice you had hit a point of frustration. Tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, over the course of the last, year and 10 months or so, one of the things people ask me, what has surprised you about this experience? And usually the first thing I would say is that given Twitter's reputation for toxicity, I've been really pleasantly surprised with how little of it, how little invective has been thrown my way, especially on something that is, speaking to a really polarizing conversation that I think shouldn't be that polarizing, but of course in 2022 it is. And that sort of came to an end. I've always had some detractors. In the beginning, it sort of evolved. In the beginning, there were a lot of folks who said, every time I'd post a story, they would say it was a hoax and COVID isn't real. Just a handful of people. Then there was a lot of incoming in more recent months from people who just wanted to reply to every tweet and say that people who are unvaccinated deserve to die, and I'm glad they're dead, and really horrible stuff like that. So I've kind of got it from all corners, but nothing sustained or calculated. And then I don't know what caused it, but about a week and a half ago, 2 weeks ago, somebody or some people with a bit of a trolling agenda discovered the account and started spamming the submission form. But they were doing it intelligently enough to make it hard to decipher which posts were real and which ones were not, until they did what sort of every troll does, which is you start by trying to be disruptive, and then you almost immediately switch lanes and become anti-Semitic and racist and everything else. And so there was a lot of nasty stuff that got thrown at me. I had to take the submission form off the site, and now people can reach out to me directly if they want to submit. It's unfortunate, but plenty of people have still submitted since then. And so we're still operating at full capacity. It's just a little frustrating. I'm just surprised it took them so long, to be honest, especially as a sort of outspoken Jewish guy running the account. That the anti-Semites waited 2 years is something I feel grateful for.
Submitting fake obits seems like a strange way to troll, but I guess I don't understand the trolling life.
Yeah, it is definitely a way of life, and people invest a lot of time in it. Like, some of the stuff that was coming through the form, it was clear that people had actually really thought this through. And I think part of what they were actually hoping I would do was accidentally post these stories, and then they could get a good laugh out of it or whatever else. So
I'll probably yell fake news at you and
try to discredit the work itself.
Alex Goldstein again, Faces of COVID. Where are you coming to us from, by the way? Are you
I am in sunny Waltham, Massachusetts.
You're a Waltham guy. Is this where most of the work gets done? You get a cup of coffee in the morning and you go at it?
This is where it all gets done, late at night and early in the morning, because I do have a day job, and I try not to spend too much of my working hours engaged in this. It's usually a very early in the morning with coffee, or a very late at night when I can't sleep endeavor.
It seems like two very it makes sense, but it seems like two very interesting times to do it. Like, okay, let's start our day off with this, with our coffee, and also a little something right before bed. But I kind of get it, though. It's a nice kind of a reflective way. It must do something for you too. I don't know whether it makes you think about that, or I don't know, but it's I can imagine it being pretty therapeutic.
It's interesting. My dad had been sick for many years, battling prostate cancer. And I actually, once the pandemic started, I basically accepted the reality that I was going to lose him during this pandemic. And I think I was starting to grieve the fact that that was going to happen. We found out that his cancer was fully terminal and not treatable back in January of 2021. And then he died 6 or 7 months later. In a weird way, I think this has kind of given me a little community to lean on, and some, folks who are grappling with not the same, but similar loss. And, the pandemic, losing someone to COVID, I think, is a bit of a universe of its own, because there's so many dynamics of this that are essentially unprecedented, both in terms of what others could have done to save your loved one, and the fact that this is something that none of us have really lived through before. But on the other hand, there's certain parts of grief and loss that are very much universal. And I find a lot of, sort of kinship in folks who have gone through this. And I have a whole community of people who I've shared their loved one's story, that when my father passed away, I began hearing from on a regular basis, and continue to. And it is a source of, compassion, a source of strength for me to grapple with my own loss. And yeah, I also think that there is something kind of reflective and solemn about it that gives purpose, right? Like it is easy for those of us who have the privilege of being able to work remotely during the pandemic. You can sometimes feel like you're living in a simulation, where you sit at your computer all day and you're like playing this video game of life to get through the day. And I run my own business, and we do a lot of really exciting, purposeful work, but day after day, it does feel the same sometimes. And having this anchored in my evenings and mornings, I actually think helps me stay grounded, that there's still a world out there, that we have a response. We're still a part of a society. One of the biggest takeaways I've had from this is that one of the reasons the pandemic, I think, has been exacted such a toll on the United States in particular, is that we have been blind for a very long time to the extent to which we don't participate as a society with each other, that we have allowed a sort of, and many of us do, and there's plenty of communities that act that way, but I feel like the kind of social contract has frayed pretty dramatically and people have prioritized sort of this individualistic, leave me the hell alone attitude that has had real consequences. And I think Faces of COVID is a way to reconnect with that. And by the way, I come to Faces of COVID with as little judgment as I possibly can. I have plenty of my own biases, but if you have a loved one who died and you want to share their story, I'm going to find a way to do it. And I'm not going to try to disrespect you in the process, even if your loved one, was afraid to be vaccinated or something like that. I am extremely pro-vaccination. The site always says if someone was vaccinated or unvaccinated, if that information is available to us. But I also don't want us to completely lose our humanity in this process and decide that there's only some people worthy of grieving. So
Well, yeah, that's well said. It's so funny. I find myself having to say that too. I was making a case the other day for coworkers and friends and a big friend circle about how I thought Novak Djokovic was. I hate that he's unvaccinated, but I thought that he was treated poorly in Australia. And I mean, I don't know how many times I had to say that I hate that he is unvaccinated, but like it's people just it immediately takes off in different directions sometimes. And I don't know. I guess
yeah,
we're all sick of this thing. That's what it is.
exactly. Yeah, I think there's a lot of pent up frustration that anything that has the potential to prolong this, even if it's an individual person's behaviors, is a real source of anger. And I get that, and I don't try to dismiss that at all. But I think there's some folks like, look, I do not have any sympathy or empathy for folks who aggressively use their platform, if it is a large one, to convince people to endanger their lives and the lives of others. And that's sort of a separate carve out for me. But if you are someone who is afraid to be vaccinated for whatever reason, health reason or whatever, I really want to convince you to get vaccinated. And so that's what I think Faces of COVID can do, is it can show you the consequences. But I also don't think you're, necessarily worthy of dehumanization, which there's plenty of that going on in all corners of our politics right now.
That's a good point too. I've seen on a lot of those Faces of COVID Twitter threads that like maybe it'll be a daughter or whatever underneath there, but they'll make the point that like my dad was not vaccinated. Please get vaccinated. He regretted it at the end, or what?
Mm-hmm.
That now we're stuck here without a dad. Like people will write that stuff in comment sections, and that's going to be powerful too, I would think.
Yeah, it's pretty. Takes a lot of courage to do that. And, I would even go as far as to say that I have been surprised at the extent to which people self-identify as having lost someone to COVID, because there's been a lot of judgment injected into who gets COVID and who dies of COVID and why, that I don't think it's an easy thing to just come out and say, I lost my loved one to COVID, and not expect that you won't get questions and reactions to that. But the best part of this experience has been that, well, there's always going to be a couple outliers. The vast majority of people are just unbelievably compassionate. Like if you look at any post, there might be 40, 50 replies, and maybe one or two of them could be snarky or unloving, and the rest of them are exactly what you would want to hear if you were in that moment. There's a story I'm posting later today that I've been thinking about, which is also a really important cautionary tale about what our responsibility is to each other, which is a story of a 60-year-old guy who was being treated for cancer. He was vaccinated and boosted, and got COVID and died. And his family in the obituary is like, we weren't able to save our dad, but if you all do the right thing, we can save the next Bob. His name is Bob. And that takes courage too, to put yourself out there at a moment like this. So hopefully, it has some kind of impact in the long run of getting a few more people to make good decisions. So.
Yeah, well said. All right, final couple minutes here with Alex Goldstein, Faces of COVID. You mentioned that I think it grounds you in some way doing this. I can also mention there have to be times where it is a grind. It's just you're having an off day, something's going on like that. What I know those days happen. So how do you get yourself through those days?
Yeah, I think there's some days I wake up kind of pissed off that this is still happening. Especially, I think the hardest period for me was after, when Delta was raging, and then we like turned over into Omicron, and it's just like, oh my God, this is just going to be interminable. Like, I mean, how much longer are we going to have to do this? How much more loss are we going to have to sustain? But the truth is, it has become such like a daily ritual that it's like, you know, almost like built into my day. Like, I don't think about it as something that's like on my to-do list. It's like, like getting up and stretching in the morning, or something that like you would have in your routine. This is built in now. And so it doesn't, I don't think about it as like something else I have to do today. I think about it as something that I actually would feel like something was missing if I didn't. And so that's I think been a helpful way for me to think about it.
I like it. All right, Alex Goldstein. We always first time guests. We do 1 minute of rapid fire. You have to answer some random questions just to
go for it.
That's what we do with all first guests. I do real quickly. Give us your background. You mentioned the Ayanna Presley. How'd you get to where you are? What's the full time job? Tell us a little bit about yourself. Oh, you with me?
Yeah, sure. Full time job. Yep. I think I'm there. Am I good?
We're good.
Right. Yeah. So background quickly. I spent many years in government. I was the spokesman for Governor Deval Patrick for a bunch of years. In 2015, I started my own communications consulting firm called 90 West. And I got 5 wonderful employees and work on lots of different issues like climate change and clean energy and things like that. And I live in Waltham. Yeah, okay. You had that part. What are my other? Give me some other my rapid fires.
All right, if you want to go to cool, very good. Well, real quickly, we just do one follow up on that. That must have been very rewarding. Deval Patrick, Ayanna Presley, obviously she won a big election here, kind of a surprise congresswoman. I mean, how great has it been working with those two over the years?
I mean, I've been really privileged to work with some really fantastic leaders as an advisor in politics. And I've been also, I think, most lucky is I got to work with people who are good at modeling empathy. And I think it's had an impact on my worldview is, people who are able to see other people and not see people as caricatures. And so it's been I've been very, very lucky. We still dabble in some politics. It's exhausting. And this is a really tough time to be working in politics, given kind of the state of the world, but I can't help myself. So we actually just announced we're working with Tanisha Sullivan, who's running against Bill Galvin for Secretary of State. So we have signed on to yet another political adventure.
Who's been on this show several times. She does a great job. So good luck to Tanisha. All right, here we go. Rapid fire. First thing that comes to your head. Favorite musician?
James Taylor.
Ooh, very nice. Favorite movie?
Jaws.
Ooh, old school. Favorite venue in the world? Can be concert, can be sports, can be anything.
Trite, Fenway Park.
Yeah, no, I like that one. Something fun. It can't be your hobby or anything, but the quarantine activity. Was it Netflix? Was it cooking? Was it...
It was building a gym in my basement.
Oh, very good.
Yeah.
Good for you. I need to get my basement in order too. And we have a lot of part of the show. We get a lot of high school kids on. Anybody that's making news, we'll bring them into the community, that sort of thing. That's a big chunk of this show. What is the best career advice you ever received?
Humility goes a really, really, really long way, especially earlier in your career.
There you go. Alex Goldstein, creator of Faces of COVID, man. Thank you so much for taking some time here. Thank you so much for taking some time every morning and every night to put this together. It's a touching thing for me to read, which is why I wanted to have you on. And obviously, you've impacted so many people. Nice job with it.
Well, thanks, Drew. Grateful for the opportunity to chat. And thank you for uplifting this. Really appreciate it.
All right. Live at Drew's house, everybody. Stay healthy out there. And we're running through January. So hang in there, all right? Live at Drew's house. Peace.